I kept 2 lines from that night pinned to the inside of my skull, and neither of them were spoken out loud. The first was mine: "You are not supposed to be awake inside in 3 sleep." The second belonged to him: "You were about to call it a temporal binding error. I'm a neuropsychiatrist. My job is where brain and mind argue in public, and we take notes." The Hawthorne Institute for Neuropsychiatry sits on a hill, Seattle, where the wind off the water carries salt into the concrete. It's a hybrid place, 1 foot in psychiatry, 1 in neurology, a 3rd foot in sleep medicine, if buildings can have that many in inpatient service, with 120 beds and an outpatient flow that sees roughly 38,000 visits a year. We share elevators with the affiliated sleep lab and an fMRI suite 2 floors down that always smells faintly like warm dust and plastic. Hawthorne is a place built for rules. Safety checks at shift change, badge numbers for every corridor, code drills that land on calendars months in advance. That's why what happened there still doesn't make sense. I anchor it to a timestamp because that is what we do when something stings us in the dark. March 3, 2023, to 14 a.m. Winter storm warning in effect. The hospital lights felt colder than usual, as if the fluorescents were dimming a single lumen at a time. A wet hiss rode the windows. Snow turned to slush and back again, chewing at the glass. The hall smelled like lemon disinfectant and the soft rubber of new gloves. The overnight heater thumped in cycles you could measure your breath against. I had a half-inch of coffee cooling on a paper lid and a chart open with a cursor blinking at me like a metronome daring me to fall behind. He arrived because of a minor concussion that shouldn't he have put him in my hallway at all. A 22-year-old male, college kid, slipped on black ice at a bus stop, knocked the back of his head on the concrete barrier. No loss of consciousness reported at the scene. The paramedics brought him in because he didn't feel right, because the world was too sharp, because noise stacked in his ears like papers, because he remembered things he said he had no way to know. He told triage exactly when the last 3 shift changes happened in our ward and recited 5 badge numbers he kept seeing like the digits were stamped on the air. He hadn't been past the admitting area. He couldn't see our doors from there. The nurse who called me sounded annoyed at the weirdness. "He's oriented times 4, she said. GCS 15, pupils brisk, CT head is clean. This sounds like your problem. My problem is the polite way hospital people mean your mystery." I walked in with my white coat crackling from the dry heat and my stethoscope still cold where it would touch skin. He sat upright on the edge of the exam bed with an ice pack tucked into the back of his beanie, a cheap scarf looped twice around his neck. He had that late-night emergency room pallor to alert, to pale, ice to shiny, the body's way of pretending it's fine before it collapses. He didn't look scared. He looked like someone who was trying to memorize me as quickly as I was trying to assess him. "Tell me what's going on," I said, the same for words I used to open the door without rushing the person through it. He smiled like he'd been waiting to be asked. "You're going to ask how I hit my head. Then you're going to ask about nausea, vomiting, headache, blurred vision, ringing in my ears, and whether I've slept. You're going to write no focal neurodeficits observed. Then you're going to write something about my memory that you want to say out loud." A lot of people guess the routine. You can find intake checklists online. But he wasn't just guessing the shape. He was nudging the exact words in the right order. I tested him anyway, the way you test a lock even when you know it's broken. Vitals: blood pressure 118/72, heart rate 68, respiratory rate 14, oxygen saturation 99% on room air, temperature 97.9 Fahrenheit. He didn't flinch at the pulse oximeter. He named the waveform as plethysmograph without being asked, the way a kid names dinosaurs to make the room safer. Cranial nerves to through 12 grossly intact, pupils equal and reactive, extraocular movements smooth, no nystagmus, finger to nose and heel to shin clean as if he'd been practicing. Sensory symmetric to light touch, motor 5 out of 5 in all extremities. Gait narrow-based, but steady, cautious from the fall. Romberg negative, no pronator drift. No aphasia. He didn't have a concussion body. He had a hypervigilant body wearing a concussion hat. Labs were not interesting, which in medicine is a kind of relief. CBC with a wide count at 6.2, hemoglobin 14.1, platelets 230, basic metabolic panel with sodium 139, potassium 4.1, chloride 102, bicarbonate 25, BUN 12, creatinine 0.9, glucose 92, LFTs unremarkable, serum ethanol negative, urine tox negative, non-contrast head CT, no acute intracranial hemorrhage, no extraaxial collection, no midline shift, ventricles normal caliber, gray-white differentiation preserved, mild soft tissue contusion of the posterior scalp. This was the kind of workup you deliver to a family with a smile and discharge instructions about rest and gradual return to activity. Say your name, I said. He did. Spell it backward. He did it faster. Tell me what you had for breakfast. He gave me the entire menu of the dorm cafeteria, the name tag of the student who swiped his card, the color of the sleeve of the person behind him in line. Look, he said, before I could shape my next sentence. He tilted his head toward the ceiling like he was listening to another floor. Janine is about to swear because her badge 1T opened the med room door on the third try. She will say come on, Hawthorne, like the building should be ashamed. The code black drill is still scheduled for 4:17, and Mr. N5B is going to pull out his IV again in exactly 13 minutes. Who is Janine? I asked, and how do you know any of that? He looked at me as if I hadn't been listening. She's nice. She wears her badge low because she says the readers in the old wing are too finicky. You'll smell her eucalyptus lotion when she walks by. One of your cameras in the south stairwell has a dead pixel that makes a soft green dot on the top right of the screen. It's going to snow sideways for 10 more minutes. Your coffee is about to taste like pennies. Coincidence loves the arrogant. I didn't drink the coffee to prove him wrong. I drank it because it was there, because my hand wanted something warm, because that's what you do with bad coffee. It tasted like pennies. The heater thumped. The windows shook. In the hall, far away at the edge of hearing, a nurse swore at a door reader and called the building by name. Hyperthymesia is a word I have used maybe 4 times in my career in actual human situations. It means perfect memory, but it's usually less supernatural than that. People with hyperthymesia can recall the trivia of their own lives with unusual depth: what they wore on a date, what they ate on a random Tuesday. It doesn't normally let you read a hospital's circulatory system like you built it. It doesn't normally let you recite badge numbers you didn't see. We admitted him to observation because I needed time. That's the truth. Sometimes admission is not about severity. It's about curiosity with a safety net. The winter storm warning made it easy to justify. The inpatient unit at Hawthorne is run like an airport. Checklists, boarding passes, delays posted on the wall. A resident pulled a cot into a side room where we could borrow a few electrodes from the sleep lab and run a quick EEG to look for anything that might explain why the world seemed to be flowing into him in the wrong direction. The electrodes were warm from someone else's scalp. The paste smelled like plastic and something sweet. The wires trailed from his head to the machine like lazy jellyfish. We started with a resting baseline, eyes open, eyes closed. Alpha waves did what alpha waves do, idling like a quiet engine when the eyes shut. He blinked obediently when we asked, even before we finished the words. There was nothing unusual until we asked him to talk. I told him to recount what he'd been doing in the hour before the fall. He cleared his throat, and the EEG dropped him off a cliff. The screen filled with the long, slow waves of N3 sleep, what textbooks call deep sleep, the kind of brain pattern your body reserves for repair, not conversation. It was like watching a seismograph during an earthquake while the person standing on the fault asks you if you want a sandwich. He spoke steadily while the machine insisted he was 3 floors under. Hold on, I said, which is the closest medicine gets to swearing in front of patients. I checked the leads with gloved hands. The adhesive held. The electrode impedance numbers were green and smug. The tracing marched along with blue confidence. He kept talking, walking me through the last hour before the fall with a level of detail you could use to build him a courtroom alibi. The machine registered the signature of Knight's deepest valley while he told us the exact number of gum packets behind the counter at a bodega near his stop and the badge number of the security guard who had nodded to him when he passed one of ours. The eggroom smelled like that warm plastic and the damp wool of a beanie drying on a radiator. In 3 while awake is not a thing. I could force it into words if I tried. The brain is local. Maybe a section is sleeping while a section is awake. Maybe we're catching some artifact. Maybe the reference electrode is dirty. Maybe the line noise is mimicking slow waves, but it isn't a thing you put your name under without bracing for an email from a committee. We asked him to recite the alphabet. We asked him to subtract 7s from 100. We asked him to tell us what his mother's voice sounded like when she was angry. The waves stayed as if they'd found a new home in him. He kept talking. That was the first rule that broke. You are not supposed to be able to generate the physiological signature of deep sleep while you are narrating your life to 2 doctors and a nurse. He did it like it had been waiting. I sent a message to the fMRI tech on call because I wanted a second opinion from a different machine. The hospital was quiet enough at 3 a.m. that we could ask for selfish things and the building would shrug and make a path. The tech liked puzzles and showed up in boots with melting snow on them. The scanner room was colder than the hallway. There's always a controlled chill that makes your breath feel a little metal. We slid him into the bore, the tube a careful mouth. He stared at the mirror where you can see your own face floating over your knees. The machine, when idle, is like a sleeping animal you've been warned not to touch. When awake, it bucks and chants. He didn't seem afraid. If anything, he looked like someone hearing a song he hadn't realized he knew. We ran a simple language task. Listen to questions. Answer when prompted. Watch for nonsense words. The timing is tight in these tasks. We plan the blocks ahead of time so we can align brain activity with the job we've asked it to do. There are no surprises in the paradigm because surprise is the enemy of clean data. We keep the questions to ourselves until the protocol reveals them. Except his brain lit before we asked. The software draws activation maps like weather radar. It shows you where blood flow changes in little storms of color. His left inferior frontal gyrus, what most people mean by Broca's area, was bright before the sentence arrived in his ears. The superior temporal gyrus, our language comprehension hub, flickered before the sound had room to exist. It wasn't anticipation in the human sense, some guess based on pattern. The logs told me the timing. His language system surged to seconds before the auditory stimulus in blocks where the question was still hidden in the sequence file. We hadn't said it. We hadn't even shown it to him. The tech looked at me with eyebrows raised to a place just short of a joke. He's early, she said. He knows you're going to talk. You don't publish a finding after 1 patient at 3 in the morning during a storm. You don't even write it in a way that will get you pulled into a committee room if you can help it. You write what you saw and what you can defend. But I also picked up the phone and called security because if he was telling the truth about badges and shift changes and private moments that belonged to my hallway, then either he was playing with me or my building was playing with me. Security laughed politely, which is an art. They told me the camera in the south stairwell did have a dead pixel, but they de-fixed it 2 days ago. Green dot, the officer said. Yeah, annoying. It's gone. He sounded proud of the fix the way you sound proud of a small thing that used to be a big annoyance. I thanked him and let him go. 10 minutes later, he called back to tell me the pixel was back. We just saw it, he said, and the way he said just made me hate time. I went back to the bedside to ask him a different kind of question. You said Janine. I told him, we do have a Janine on nights. Tell me something she couldn't tell you. Tell me something that isn't a guess. He didn't even consider the assignment. He rolled it around like I had given him a toy with a loose wheel. On February 30th, he said like it was an address and not a mistake. She walked into the stairwell and cried because her hands were cold, and the automated towel dispenser wouldn't spit out anything, and she didn't want anyone to see her cry in the med room. The camera with the green dot saw it. You can ask it. February 30th isn't a day, I said, to Gentle. He looked confused the way people look confused when a rule you've us told them is new to them metaphorically. It was a day, he said. It was the day with the beige soup. The clock on the pharmacy safe had stopped at 3:07 and nobody fixed it. There were 26 syringes in the top left bin. Your code cart wheel squeaked. He listed details until the story had a smell again. After he fell asleep, if what he did could be called sleeping, we checked security logs. We put eyes on cameras. We scrubbed time stamps. There was no February 30th in the log, of course. There were entries on the 28th and the 1st of March, but at 3:12 p.m. on March 2nd, the south stairwell camera recorded a nurse with her badge low, head bent, rubbing her hands, shoulders moving the way shoulders move when someone is trying to cry without making sound. The dead pixel flickered a faint green dot in the top right corner. The pharmacy safe camera showed a wall clock inside that had stopped at 3:07 and nobody had replaced the battery. There were 26 syringes in the top left bin. The code cart wheel squeaked on its left side when someone moved it a minute later. The soup that day, according to the cafeteria menu nobody reads, was cream of something. Beige. Dates are a social contract we make with each other because the sun is boring and we need a way to tame it. He had broken the contract and still signed the document. That was the second rule I didn't know how to write down without setting it on fire. His memory was perfect for a day that didn't exist, and still it fit the world like a key. There was a generator test on the schedule for pre-dawn. Hospitals test their backups when bodies are least likely to notice. For 17 a.m. is a time that belongs to nurses and repair crews, not patients. The warning email had gone out weeks earlier and lived in our inboxes like a small, polite ghost. I had forgotten it until the lights went out. It wasn't dramatic at first. The lights dimmed away a person size before they speak. Then the building exhaled all at once and we were in that soft red world emergency lighting creates, where everything looks like a crime scene photograph. The air felt colder the same second the hum rose from the walls, the particular, dentistry-adjacent sound of electricity rerouting itself. Somewhere, a UPS board whined like a mosquito a room away. The electrodes on his scalp smelled stronger now, warmed by his skin in the cooler air. He sat up the way a dog sits up before an earthquake. Hold still, I started, stupidly, reflexively, as if I had to keep him in this second. He didn't move. He started talking. He narrated what the building was seeing, not what we were seeing in the room, not what he could guess from our faces or from the weather at the window. He narrated the cameras. Camera 1 in admitting is watching the doors breathe because the pressure is wrong with the generator on. The mats curl at the edges. The security desk screen 3 has the green dot again. Camera 7 in the south stairwell has salt footprints in the V shape. Camera 12 in pharmacy is angry. Its clock is wrong. It thinks it's 3:07 forever. There's a plastic bin with 26 syringes. The thermostat in the pediatric hallway says 68, but it's lying. It's 66. The elevator number is stuck on L even though it moved. If you've ever watched a person speak at the same time, the hair on your arms lifts because the air decided to be colder without asking you. You know the exact sound the emergency lights make to a human ear, a humming that is mostly silence with a shape pressed into it. The blackout took the hospital's gloss and made it a bone. He kept going. He spoke the building second by second like he was doing the voiceover for a movie the director had sent him last week. Camera 19 is drunk, he said softly. Its timestamp is 6 seconds ahead and then it corrects itself, and then it's ahead again. Security will try to fix it at 4:32 and then say good enough at 4:34. Camera 9 in the north stairwell sees the janitor's keys swinging like a metronome. There's a clock in a safe that doesn't know what time it is. There's a woman in scrubs in the stairwell breathing eucalyptus and counting backwards from 300 because she thinks it helps. There's a shadow in the reflection of the vending machine that doesn't belong to anyone in the hall. Stop, I said, though I didn't sound like I meant it. How do you know any of this? He didn't look at me. He stared at the air like it was a screen only he had the password for. It's loud, he whispered. It got loud when I hit my head and then it got organized. Like the station you have to tune exactly or you get static. Like you tune to me. Like you tune to all of it. It hurts because it's too much, but it's worse when I try to ignore it. It goes under the floor and pulls at my socks. He told me, without being anywhere near it, that the pharmacy safe's broken clock was visible when the door was opened to restock and that it was set to 3:07 because someone had taken the battery out, so it would stop beeping. The safe held its own time like a grudge. He told me that the camera in the NICU hall had a reflection of a broken exit sign that you could only see if the door to the family room was half open. He told me that the mail room camera liked to mislabel 02 as 20 when the month rolled. That human hands corrected it every year, annoyed like the machine was late to class. He told me the more he talked, the heavier his body felt. I wanted to be brave for him in a way that didn't require lying. So I stood close to the bed without touching him, because sometimes touch is too much. I told him he was safe, even though safe is not a thing you can promise when the world has decided to show its backstage. The generator came fully online, and the main lights returned with a brightness that felt like judgment. The hum diffused into the ceiling like a smell fading. He blinked hard as if trying to push a new picture into focus. The eek still wore its slow waves like a winter coat. He clutched the blanket with both hands and exhaled as if he'd been holding his lungs up by their corners. We checked with security later, because I had to. Camera 19's time stamped its stutter by 6 seconds, and then correct. The north stairwell did catch a janitor's keys swinging in metronome arcs as if someone had been practicing with time. The pharmacy safe clock was indeed frozen at 3:07 as if the battery had been a sacrifice and not a solution. The vending machine reflection did catch a shadow that didn't belong to anyone in the hall because another camera on a different delay contributed its ghost. The thermostat on the pediatric hall lied by 2 degrees when the generator took over. Security tried to fix it at 4:32 and then said good enough at 4:34 because the building always wins. At 5 a.m., when the storm outside decided to turn from confetti to rain, I sat at a screen and tried to write the night down in a way that would make sense to another person later. I failed the first 3 times. Like the act of typing uncomplicated words made the complicated ones retreat. My unspoken diagnosis kept changing its clothes to see if it could sneak out under my own attention. Temporal binding error, paramnesia, confabulation with a good ear, a seizure with excellent manners, a conversion symptom trying to become a religion. I did not write the words, the building let him in. The morning team came on like a change in weather. Morning people carry their own light. The day psychiatrist raised an eyebrow soft enough to count as sympathy and tapped the screen with one finger when she reached my note about 3 sleep while talking. Artifact, she said, not unkindly, and if it isn't, it's a paper you shouldn't write. She looked at the timestamps and pursed her lips at the fMRI pre-activation like someone hearing a rumor about a coworker they like. Anticipation, she said. Predictive coding. Brains love to be early, that is true. It also wasn't what happened. Later, that morning, I walked back into his room with a spiral notebook and a plan I could defend. If this was performance, I wanted the audience to be empty. If this was a brain slipping a gear in a way I didn't yet have a name for, I wanted to see where the slip happened. I told him we would play a game. I would write questions on paper without speaking them. I would show him the piece of paper only when it was his turn to answer. He nodded like he'd been waiting for me to catch up. I wrote down 2 words and folded the page in half. I looked at him the way you look at a person when you want to signal that you are telling the truth without telling them anything. Don't say anything until I show you, I said, and he nodded again. He answered my first question before I unfolded the paper. He said, "Blue," and when I opened it, there was my question, "What color is the carpet in the MRI prep room?" He said, "3." And the paper I hadn't yet unfolded said, "How many elevators run on the East Bank at night?" He said, "Left," and the paper said, "Which wheel on the code card squeaks?" His voice shook like a battery dying. He looked as if standing up would make gravity win. I tried to be clever. I wrote down a nonsense word we had never used, a non-word built from the worst habits of crossword constructors. He pronounced it correctly and told me not to be mean. I wrote a sentence in a language he told me he did not speak. He answered it in the correct language and then apologized for sounding rude because he could hear the tired in my punctuation. On the third page, I didn't write anything. I stared at a blank sheet and thought the words I had been refusing to say temporal binding error. I formed the syllables in my head without moving my lips, without letting a single muscle in my face give me away. He breathed out like someone finding the ending of a story and said, "You were about to call it a temporal binding error." He pressed his fingers into his palms and winced like spirit gum on skin. There are two kinds of fear in a hospital. The first is the regular fear that wears a coat and waits in line like everyone else. Fear of needles. Fear of words like cancer. Fear of bad news you can hold in your hand like a paper. The second is the kind that makes trained people forget that they're trained. It's the fear of the rule you didn't know existed being broken in front of you without anyone raising their voice. I wanted to call this a trick because tricks are a story shape we understand. But if it was a trick, it was a trick that bent the fMRI software along with human attention, a trick that made the EEG lie with a straighter face than any artifact I've ever seen, a trick that lived in the building's wiring as comfortably as it lived in his head. I sat down on the plastic chair that complains loudly when a grown-up uses it and watched him breathe. He looked like someone who had been awake much longer than his body. He dozed in the afternoon, if dozing is what you call lying still while your brain's deep sleep signature holds a parade. The resident checked on him and reported a quiet room, no agitation, no wandering, no hallucinations. He had a minor headache at the bruised spot and a throat sore from talking too much to a building. He ate a pudding cup like a kid who had been promised a gold star. By evening, he was ready to walk. I had run out of reasons to keep him that weren't about me. We gave him a conservative discharge with concussion precautions and a follow-up in clinic and a number to call if the world got loud again. He shook my hand and thanked me for listening, which was cruel because I had not listened the way he meant it. He smiled without showing his teeth. He leaned in slightly as if he had a secret he wasn't going to tell me, and then he did not tell me. The winter storm warning expired. The sky went back to its default Seattle color, thoughtful gray. That would have been the end, except the next morning I found a voicemail on my office line. The time stamp said 12:09 a.m., 2 hours before he had walked into triage, before had typed a sentence about him, before had thought the words binding error with the kind of stubborn caution you use to test thin ice. The message was his voice, and not his voice. You know how a person sounds different through a machine. Like the shape of their mouth has been translated into pixels. "Doctor," he said, and he used my last name like he'd found it written under a sticker. "You are going to think temporal binding error. You will not say it out loud because you are kind. You will wonder whether consciousness is a river or an ocean or a weather pattern, and you will decide not to write that down because it sounds like poetry and you were warned in your training about sounding like poetry. You will smell warmed plastic and think it's the electrodes, but it's not. It's the memory of every electrode, and it's older than you. You will want to save me and you will want to save yourself. Please pick one." I stood and listened to the message again, with my finger hovering over the keys like I could pause my own breath. The office smelled like old paper and hand sanitizer and the faint ghost of someone else's takeout. The phone system stuttered if you pressed the button too hard. The new IT ticket I'd filed about that was still open. The time stamp did not move. The building hummed in the low way buildings do when they're deciding whether to be kind. I did not call him back. What would I say? That I had heard him before he arrived, that he had told me my diagnosis, before I had allowed myself to think it, that the mind is a place where time goes to break its ankles, and we keep treating it like step count. I filed the voicemail in a folder named Personal, so that if anyone ever asked to see my professional correspondence, they wouldn't have to wonder which box that one lived in. In the days that followed, I tried to replicate the night with science like a stage magician trying to replicate a ghost with smoke. I reached out to the fMRI tech and asked if we could run the language paradigm again with shuffled blocks, with a different machine, with a different trigger. We put the scanner into service mode and handed it new scripts like candy. He came back, earnest and apologetic and too tired. Nothing misbehaved. His brain lit when we asked, and not 1 second sooner. We ran EEG again and he spoke like a person, and the machine told the truth this time. The cameras kept their time like model citizens. The stairwell pixel was gone for good. The pharmacy safe clock got a new battery like a penitent. We tried to be clever and failed in boring ways. We separated staff so that nobody who had seen him would be in the room the next time. We wrote questions on paper and in our heads and on screens, and asked a resident who had never met him to think a question at a time he wouldn't guess. He smiled and said he was sorry. He could feel the signal sometimes in the walls like music through an apartment wall, but he couldn't tune it on command. It was like that station with static when it came in. It was perfect. When it didn't exist. I wrote notes that will never be published. I wrote observations that read like superstition. I cleaned up the language so that if an administrator stumbled into my chart, they would find a boring brain and a psychosocial situation and a plan that looked like care and not awe. I used words like functional and conversion and adjustment because those words build a fence when you need one. I became careful at work in a way that looked like maturity and felt like retreat. The Institute runs on committees the way bodies run on blood. A month later, one of those committees called me in to talk about the overnight use of the fMRI suite and the risks of running unscheduled tasks without the right signatures. They weren't wrong. They used phrases like chain of custody and research protocol and patient privacy, and I nodded because they were right in the world where they were right. I got a letter for my file that said please Dante in the most elegant possible script. I told myself I was lucky it wasn't worse. I told myself they were protecting patients and data and me from each other. It is possible to be grateful and diminished at the same time. I stopped taking overnight call after that quarter. Officially, I transferred to a role with more outpatient hours and more teaching, which is true. Unofficially, I didn't want to stand in that building at the 14 a.m. again and feel it looking back at me like I had learned a password I shouldn't have and then forgot it. I lined my pockets with day shift and walked through halls that smelled like coffee and the lemon promise of freshly mopped floors. I told the story only in pieces to people who knew how to keep a story in their chest and not on their tongue. It would be easy to end here with a lesson, but medicine isn't a TED Talk, no matter how many grand rounds try. What I have is a long hallway with lights that are sometimes too bright and sometimes not bright enough, and a question that keeps repeating itself. Is consciousness a place that happens inside us, or a place we tune into, like a station that only fits between numbers when the weather is right? When he said February 30th as if it belonged to him, did he mean a day we all missed because we are poor archivists of the present, or did he mean the extra space consciousness makes when it refuses to be square with the calendar? Does memory run forward sometimes and we call it prediction because we like that word better than prophecy? I've told myself all the science I can stand and that story still breathes. There are days, I think we met at 12:09 a.m., when my voicemail took his voice and filed it in my day like a seed. There are days, I think we never met at all and I am remembering the shape of someone else's story, and its fidelity is what scares me. On quiet afternoons in clinic, when the heater is clicking, and the city's gray feels compassionate, I can still smell the warm plastic of electrodes the way you can smell a rainstorm coming. and I watch my patients' mouths form words that their brains will make room for whether I deserve to hear them or not. I think about that machine drawing weather maps in his head to seconds early. I think about deep sleep walking around with a voice. People ask me why I still work here if I am so rattled by a story that one T sits still. The real answer is boring. The real answer is that for every rule that breaks, 100 rules hold. The Institute is still a place where eye contact and a warm blanket and a steady hand around a cup of water do the kind of work science pretends it invented. When I walk past the pharmacy now, the clock inside the safe tells the correct time, and I hate it a little for that. The south stairwell camera has no green dot, and I sometimes glance up as if it might wink at me, and it never does, which is reasonable and disappointing. Janine wears her badge a little higher because someone told her to. If you stand in that hallway long enough, you can hear the wheels on the code cart sing to you in the key of almost. 2 weeks ago, on a morning that tasted like pennies again for reasons I can't explain, I found the old voicemail in the folder where I'd left it. I pressed play because of habit more than hope. It sounded different older, which is a trick old machines play. The message didn't change, but I did. Please pick one, he had said, and I think I have. I'm staying. I'm not staying the same. Before you ask me the thing you're about to ask, do I believe him, do I believe myself, do I think the mind is a radio or a room, answer me this. If you'd been there, would you have kept listening even if what you heard might never be proved? Would you have written the rule down anyway and signed your name under it because the alternative was pretending you didn't hear your own voice echo back 2 hours early? I haven't told you the last thing he said to me on discharge because I don't know what to do with it. He said, "Don't worry about February 30th. It's just where you keep the things you're not ready to make real yet. It's a drawer." And then he laughed like he'd remembered something that hurt and he left. You can live a long time with a drawer you don't open. You can keep it in your office behind the file marked personal and a phone system that stutters when you press too hard. You can walk by the south stairwell and check a camera that no longer has a green dot because you like to be disappointed by solvable problems. You can become the kind of doctor who writes nothing that sounds like poetry even when you have to hold your breath to keep the poetry from leaking out your nose. You can become a better teacher and a more careful note writer and a person who rolls their eyes at their younger self because it's easier to assign condescension than to admit reverence. Or you can do what I do on good days and sit with a patient in a room that smells faintly of lemon and warmed plastic and watch the light in their eyes get to seconds ahead of their mouth and decide not to be afraid of it. I told you there were 2 lines from that night that stayed. You've heard the second one already in a voicemail that traveled wrong along a wire that didn't know the right way to go. The first one was mine and I didn't say it out loud because I didn't want the building to learn it. You are not supposed to be awake inside and 3 sleep. You are not supposed to be awake inside and 3 sleep and narrating every camera in the building and the broken clock in the locked pharmacy safe while the emergency lights hum a hymn and the air grows cold enough to make your teeth notice each other. You are not supposed to be awake inside and 3 sleep and tell me my diagnosis before I have the dignity to think it. I am not asking you to believe me. I am asking you if your hands are clean enough to hold a story like this without trying to fix it. If this happened on your unit at 2 in the morning, would you call it in and let it be carved into a policy, or would you sit 1 minute longer in the red light and listen for the part of the building that still wants to talk? That is your choice as much as it was mine. The morning after, I deleted the voicemail and then pulled it out of the trash and then closed the folder without deciding. The time stamp did not move. The clock in the pharmacy safe keeps excellent time now and I wish it didn't. Janine brings lemon muffins sometimes on nights, and I pretend I don't know she cried in the stairwell on a day that never happened. The Institute's outpatient volume still hums along at $38,000 a year because people come here to make sense of time, and sometimes we give them a map instead of a compass. I walk past the fMRI suite and look through the glass and remember a brain that lit to seconds early to questions that had not yet been asked, and I think not for the first or last time, that we are always arriving a little before ourselves and telling ourselves it's punctuality. I'll tell you the rest another time. For now, hold this with me. The next morning, on a line stamp 1209 A.M., a voice I had not yet met told me precisely what I would diagnose and what I would hide from my own note. The building shook once like it was laughing, and somewhere, on February 30th, which is the drawer we keep for impossible things that turned out to be ours, a clock that no longer needs a battery kept time that did not apply to anyone but me. If you want to know why I stopped taking nights, it wasn't fear. It was respect, the kind that makes you sit down and make room, the kind that hears a hum and doesn't change the station because you think you read a grown-up to like the song, the kind that lets the world be bigger than your chart will allow. Next time, I'll tell you about the ICU case that made this one feel harmless.